Over the last 30 years, I've worked with a lot of different organizations and individuals that are trying to start new initiatives, solve problems, other things like that. And I have found that there is one fundamental difference between those who are really consistently, repeatedly successful in solving problems and creating new products and initiatives that solve problems and that are successful. And I've noticed that this is true for people who are engaged in personal problem solving and decision making and that literal and metaphorical treasure hunting as well. It's a fundamental difference in sort of how their brain works, how they approach this topic. So for the first, they tend to think a lot in a sort of philosophical way about the problem and the idea. And that's good, that's helpful. In fact, my mind works that way. I think a lot that way as well. But the second group, they can think philosophically, but they do something in addition to that the philosophical people don't. And that's what I want to talk about in this video and how you can use that to make better decisions, to engage in clearer thinking, to actually discover real truth, something that's really solid and standing, to discover those literal and metaphorical treasures. So stay with me and we will do that. So let me start by I have two items in my hand here. I have a mug and I have a treasure box. Now here's my question for you. Which of these weighs more? So take a second, think about that for a moment. What would you say? How would you answer that question? What's your first reaction? Now, the first category of problem solver and decision maker is going to base their decision almost entirely upon prior knowledge, assumptions, just what they think they know about a wooden box versus a mug. So they'll look at this wooden box and they'll think, well, those are pretty light, they don't have much weight in them. And the mug, that's a pretty big mug. So I'm pretty confident that the mug weighs more than the box. But what if I had a really heavy weight in here? What if this was full of coins? You don't know a lot about this box yet, right? So this is the difference. Now, when you're trying to solve a problem or you're trying to figure something out, the mindset of the one person is just relying upon your prior knowledge, your prior assumptions, your guesses, what you kind of think and believe about the world and how it works and about how wooden boxes compare to glass mugs and so forth. But the other person does something else. And they do at least sort of two things. The first thing they do is they ask questions. They ask questions about it. They ask maybe, can I hold them? Can I actually get some personal experience with them? Or, well, what's in the box? What's in the mug? Maybe the mug also contained a bunch of coins. You don't know that, right? So they start with a position of curiosity. And they want to learn more, they want to ask questions, and sometimes they ask a lot of questions, even to the point that it's a little bit annoying of the people around them how many questions they ask. And maybe I could even make this more challenging. I could set different parameters. I'd say, you have to tell me which of these weighs more. You can ask, and then they can ask me questions, but they can't touch the items, right? So there could be different parameters that are set, and that's really good because that reflects the real world. Sometimes when you are trying to answer a question, you're trying to discover a truth, you're trying to solve a problem, you do have limitations. There are things that you can or cannot do in order to answer the question. If you had unlimited resources available, you could give a certain and precise answer. But notice that the second category, they ask questions, but they do something else. They don't just ask questions. In general, what they're trying to do is to create some kind of way to actually verify or experiment or get some gained insight. So the difference between the two people is one tends to rely upon prior knowledge, while the other does cheap, quick, simple experiments to gain insight or maybe get an answer to the question. So if I broke this down into 5 steps, here's what I would say. The people who are consistently great at problem solving, discovering truths, launching things that work, that are successful for themselves, for other people, is one, they surface the assumptions that they're acting on. So they pause for a moment and they don't just use their gut reactions. They don't just use their instinct alone. They maybe use instinct. That's certainly a meaningful thing, but they name what they're assuming. They're saying things like, well, I'm assuming this, I'm assuming that. And they're taking all of that into account. They're acknowledging the things that they're assuming, and they're acknowledging the kind of limitations or weaknesses of those kinds of assumptions. The second thing that they do is they try to identify some kind of simple, quick, low cost, small test that they could conduct to gain more insight, to get closer to the truth. So they're not just relying upon their own gut reaction, their own intuition, or other things like that. They're going to actually test it for real. And in fact, in the business world, when I've worked with small businesses as a consultant and the like in the past, those who are launching new products, usually because my consulting was on helping people launch educational products and initiatives mostly, there was a little book called The Mom Test. And the idea was to when you're creating a minimally viable product or service, you want to get feedback where that goes, the mom test is, when you show something to your mom, the premise of the book was, your mom's going to be very affirming and positive about your idea. And so you want someone who's going to tell you the brutal truth about your idea. So you can get the best, most accurate, truthful feedback, and then you can revise, adapt, and move forward from there. Well, that's the same way that these problem solvers work, is they're always saying, what can I do? What kind of simple test or experiment can I conduct that's going to help me see things that I don't see right now? And that is the difference maker. If you start to think that way, if you start to act that way, if you make that a key habit in your problem solving, your decision making, other things like that, you're going to take yourself a step above the vast majority of other people who are really just making decisions based upon information provided to them, gut reactions, instinct, history, past experience, things like that. And sometimes those are helpful, but when you're trying to get something new and you're trying to solve a novel problem, that's going to require you to step into this experimenting and testing mindset. And then a third thing is run the test before you start defending your assumption. So you have that assumption, that's step one, and now you're basically putting your assumption in check. Before you really start kind of digging into your assumption, you're going to bracket it, put it aside, and conduct the test. And that's really, really key. And then you're also going to do something interesting. When you do the test, go beyond just yes and no answers. When you're testing something, what does this test or this experiment tell me that I didn't know before? And it's not just it worked or it didn't work, it gave me the answer, it didn't give me the answer. Yes, sometimes it's that, but sometimes your test or experiment wasn't as helpful as you thought, but it would point out something that you would have missed had you not conducted the test or the experiment. And that is also really key. And then that's really sort of the last part. It leads you to step 5, which is really just saying, okay, what actionable insight have I gained from this test, and what do I do next? Is it another test, another experiment, another question, or do I feel like I've gotten enough insight to actually make the decision, try to solve the problem, move forward? That is the difference maker. So many people are really just working through in the abstract or the hypothetical. I see this over and over again, even in big organizations and meetings where the person in authority steps in the room and maybe they heard about an idea at a conference or online or something like that, and they're just convinced that's the way to go. And they defend it as if it's like some really sacred concept or idea, but it may or may not be the solution to their problem. And yet they move forward. They invest time and money and resources and all sorts of things into applying that idea, but it's an untested idea. So there's the key. The key is don't move forward with untested ideas. Find at least the simplest way to gain actionable insight, to test, to experiment even just a little bit, and then you have a better chance of moving forward in the right direction. I hope you find this useful. I look forward to your comments.